In the border city of Denton, a hunched-over old woman, her hand tightly gripping a child's, walked slowly forward, step by step. The director of the Denton Relief Station saw them and asked, "Do you two have nowhere else to go?" The director sighed and muttered, "Another village has met with disaster. This world is never peaceful." Hearing these words, the old woman's aged eyes welled up with tears. Her voice was urgent. "Please, sir, we truly have nowhere else to go. Please have mercy." Saying this, she held out a dirt-stained hand. It was a gemstone brooch with an exquisite design. The director didn't hesitate. He took it and ordered, "Follow me." The child with the old woman didn't cry at all. His silver hair was rare in the South, and his pale skin further accentuated the child's unusual appearance. The old woman led the child, following the director. They passed through a long series of iron gates, finally stopping before a large, square building. They were taken to an empty room on the second floor, a place old and squalid, faintly smelling of the mustiness of an old inn. The director asked the old woman her name. The old woman replied, "My name is Helen, and this child is John." The director nodded. "It's late. Tomorrow, I'll tell you both the rules and the costs here." Helen said gratefully, "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." Upon entering the room and locking the door, Helen sighed in relief, letting go of John's hand. The boy immediately asked, "Where's father? This must be very hard for you." Helen gently comforted him. "Get some sleep. They'll be back soon." Looking at John's innocent face, Helen smiled. It was also her last smile. That very night, Helen didn't make it. A mouthful of blood spurted from her lips, her eyes gradually dimming. "Please, you must live happily." With those words, she breathed her last on the bed. John woke up and saw Helen lying still, thinking she was asleep. When he got closer, he was horrified to find blood everywhere and screamed piercingly. Early the next morning, John's cries woke the director. He irritably opened the door to check the situation. The director's wife asked, "How did she die?" The director then spat and replied, "I don't know either. Her face was ashen. Must have drunk some kind of poison." His wife looked at John and muttered, "So, what about this child? He looks quite pretty, doesn't he?" The director thought for a moment, then asked, "How many silver-haired kids do we have here?" The wife replied, "None with hair this beautiful. Pauline's hair is at least somewhat similar." The director nodded. "Look at his eye color. He looks like a count of mixed blood. How about putting him to work with Pauline?" The wife agreed. They'd look like a pitiful mother-son pair. "Let's do that. I guess earning money this way will surely bring in more than her working alone." The Denton Relief Station, outwardly a royal charitable organization, took in the homeless and refugees, providing food and shelter to receive subsidies. But in reality, this place used the subsidies as a cover to exploit children for profit. Its main income came from the dozens of people sent out daily to beg. It was a dark and sinful place. Thus, John was brought before gaunt Pauline. The director told her, "Pauline, from today on, you take him to work with you." Pauline nodded, expressionless. "I'm Paulina. From now on, you have to stay with me." John was silent, his face gloomy. Pauline looked at him, her voice gentle. "I don't know what you've been through, but one thing is certain." She sat down next to John. "No matter what, you have to keep living. If you do that, happiness will eventually find you. So shall we go?" John nodded in agreement and took her arm. Then John began to weep in Pauline's arms. Although their mother-son relationship was merely for begging purposes, Pauline always took very good care of him. She protected John from being bullied by other children and from the threats of vagrants. Because Pauline was always by John's side, he never felt lonely. Time flew by. One winter, 5 years after this pretend mother and son had been living together. He was now 8 years old. Pauline called him to sit beside her. "This morning, I heard you're leaving soon. Is that right?" "Yes, that's right. I'm going to be a servant in a nobleman's mansion." "Mother Pauline, wherever you are, I believe you'll do well." His gentle words carried comfort and trust. "What are you talking about? Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself." The two of them talked and joked, creating a warm atmosphere. "Haha, your hair is all messy." A clear laugh rang out. "Thank you, Mother, for all these years. When Helen passed away, I felt like I had lost everything. When the children in the orphanage bullied me, even when vagrants caused trouble, you were always there to protect me. That's why I'm truly grateful to you. Mother Pauline is going to a better place now. I want to congratulate you from the bottom of my heart. My mother, my father, and now Mother Pauline, everyone is leaving me." Tears streamed down young John's cheeks. Pauline hugged John's thin body tightly, feeling his hot tears. Her heart ached, realizing how much she loved John. John sobbed, his body trembling. Pauline couldn't hold back her tears either. She placed her hand on his chest, then placed her hand on her own, gently explaining, "Ah, John, only when there's nothing left in your heart are you truly alone. If you always keep those who have left in your heart, you will never be alone. Just feel it carefully, and you'll understand how much we love you." John bowed his head, looking at his chest. "How do I feel the things in my heart?" he asked. Pauline smiled. "Close your eyes and feel with your heart." The night Pauline left the workhouse, after everyone was asleep, John quietly opened the door and went out to the workhouse guard. He remembered Pauline's words, "Feel with your heart." Then he closed his eyes. Before him was pitch black darkness, not a sliver of moonlight. He kept thinking, searching in this dark, empty world. Suddenly, he thought that to see the things in his heart, he had to open the eyes of his soul. At that moment, John's inner self underwent a miraculous change. In the dark world, a faint halo of light began to appear, growing clearer and clearer. His body felt something very different, as if an invisible energy was enveloping his body. When John opened his eyes, he was utterly astonished, as if in a new world. In this new world, the trajectory of the wind and the movement of the air appeared clearly. The energy of life pulsed everywhere. Trees, birds, and insects all radiated their own unique light. John realized that when he closed his eyes, the world didn't disappear. Things unseen did not mean darkness, and darkness did not mean nothingness. This momentary experience completely changed the way John perceived the world, an intense experience like enlightenment or awakening. When he opened his eyes again, the world, once limited by sight, became vaster and deeper after closing his eyes. He felt that even with his eyes closed, he could see a brighter, warmer, and more brilliant world, without fearsome expressions or sharp gazes. In his heart, John thought he could feel the love of his mother, his father, Helen, and Pauline. That day John had truly seen the love of those who cared for him in a world filled with light. But no one knew he had undergone such a miraculous awakening process. "Wake up. Everyone get ready for work." Amidst the director's call, the children hurried into action. No one said anything, put on yesterday's clothes, and left their rooms. John stood by the window, gazing far into the distance. It had been a year since Mother Pauline left. Perhaps she was still adjusting to her new job, as there had been no news of her since that day. The children were lined up, neatly to be assigned their begging areas. John was assigned to Zone 1, the place with the highest income, and was treated relatively well, because his earnings were higher than most. The foreman patted John's shoulder. "I'm here. Don't worry about those bad guys." This man was Black, the foreman in charge of Zone 1. One day, after hearing about my past, he started treating me well. Yes, Black. I'm counting on you today, too," John said. It was also he who had helped me realize that the auras I saw were mana. Later, I discovered he was a swordsman who could use mana. However, his mana emanated a strange, faint aura. Mana is the source of all things in the world. Everyone breathes in mana, and then breathes it out, unconsciously participating in the world cycle. Among them, Black, and a few others, could use mana in special ways. Through a type of training called mana cultivation, John began his work of begging, finding a busy street corner and sitting down. A little money was dropped into his box. John smiled. "Thank you." His adorable face drew the admiration of many noble young ladies. John had gradually become accustomed to seeing both the material world and the world of mana at the same time. This had once been a great challenge, but now he had somewhat adapted. While begging, he often thought about this. It was only recently that he could see both realities simultaneously, and though the initial dizziness from their overlap was difficult, he was now getting used to it. "Hey, there you are. Wow, you've earned quite a bit." Black squatted down next to John, his eyes full of surprise. "It's all thanks to kind people," John replied with a smile. "That's right, but you need to be more careful." Black sighed. "This world is full of people who don't want to see others do well. If you notice anything suspicious, report it to me immediately." "Understand. Thank you, Black. I'm off. See you later." John decided not to mention the strange things he had witnessed in the past few days. In the crowds, he had noticed strangers with unusually bright and powerful mana, different from others. They were like Black, capable of condensing mana within their bodies. Their colors truly stood out. They often stared at me and then quickly disappeared. Although he didn't feel threatened, he kept his ability to see mana a secret. I don't know what would happen if others found out. He told himself, "Thank you, sir. Have a good day." John said to a passerby. Noticing his begging pot was nearly full, he intended to go back for a new one. He walked through a dark alley towards Zone 1. Suddenly, he realized strangers were following him. They appeared from behind, from the side, and even faintly in the distance. Their movements and speed clearly indicated they were tracking John. Could they be from the Manson gang? John worried. He braced himself for the possibility of injury and calculated how to respond. If they approached, right now, the only person he could rely on was Black and his own ability to sense mana. John knew he couldn't expect help from the residents of Denton, who might toss a coin to begging children, but would certainly not get involved in any disputes. His top priority was to reach the safe base. After calculating the distance, John bolted. As expected, the strangers maintained their distance and continued to follow him. John's heart pounded. This thrill, however, sharpened his senses even more. He simultaneously opened his 3 eyes, his 2 eyes that observe the world, and his spiritual eye that perceived mana, focusing intently to track them. He constantly calculated the distance between himself and the strangers, adjusting the positions of the mana auras on the mental map. In his head, he even forgot he was simultaneously observing the world and himself. John ran for his life. Finally, he was almost there, but this brief relief was quickly shattered when the strangers suddenly sped up. John glanced to the side, seeing dark figures gliding across the rooftops, leaping from one building to another. Both were dressed in black suits, swords at their hips, looking very menacing. They weren't from the Manson gang. What should he do now? Should he hide? Just as John hesitated, he heard a familiar voice. It was Black, and he was running towards him. He ran across the sidewalk on the other side of the street, stepping onto the roof of a carriage on the main road, then leaped down, landing in front of John. He skidded from his sprint, scooped John into his arms, and yelled, "Hold on tight." Then he took off, running like the wind. John experienced a speed he had never known before, much faster than riding a carriage. Black and the strangers moved as nimbly as birds. The surrounding scenery flashed by in an instant. They crossed from building to building, leaping up with loud sounds. Even after John had safely returned to the poorhouse, his heart was still pounding. All the other children will be back too. Now get some rest. "Hey John, didn't you hear me?" Black tapped John, who was dazed, on the head. "This kid has been too scared to move since earlier. They can't get here, so calm down and go inside." John went inside and stood by the door. An unconcealable smile showed his current joy. It turned out that during the chase, he didn't know how many blocks they had run through. John gradually stopped paying attention to the surrounding scenery, nor to the tension of the chase. His entire attention was focused on Black, on the chaotic magic power on him. He closely observed the process of Black's magic power moving, as if examining his own body. How his body moved, his breathing rhythm, how the magic power circulated with each breath, how the body reacted to the circulating magic power when concentrating power into his limbs, how the condensed magic power fluctuated when stepping on rooftops and jumping, how the magic power exploded and dissipated. These images were deeply imprinted in John's third eye. One absorbs life energy with breath, concentrates it in the body, and uses it when needed. Fourthly, John thought, "I get it." John finally understood how to use magic power. "I have to try it right away." After this realization, this thought kept swirling in his head. A brighter than usual smile appeared on John's face, in contrast to John's silence. The dormitory was unusually noisy at this time. Although it was still early, all the beggar children had returned to their lodgings, whispering anxiously, but no one dared to ask. Silence. The director entered. He looked through a document, checked the number of children, looked around the dormitory, and then said, "I know you were wondering why you were called back so early. I did this for your safety. However, don't worry too much. After the supervisors have checked each area, you'll be taken back to your posts to continue working. We don't know when that will happen. So, everyone wait in the dormitory. Don't make noise." As for John, the children, who moments ago were taking advantage of the director's inattention to whisper among themselves, all looked aside in surprise. Only John calmly looked at the director. "Yes, director. Pack your things, child. You will move to another place." "Why, sir? I'm already 9 years old. If I say pack, then pack." John, full of anxiety, followed. The director, surprised to see the destination was the main building. It should be known that children from the dormitory were usually not allowed near the main building, as the work carriages usually departed from behind the dormitory. This was the first time John had walked towards the main gate of the poorhouse, where the main building was located. "Wait here." The director left the bewildered John in place and went alone towards the main building's gate. The man who appeared next was burly, tall and muscular. The director handed a document to this man, who was probably an employee of the main building. The two began to talk, but because of the distance, John couldn't hear clearly what they were saying. John focused his mind, trying to concentrate the moving magic power into his ears. He understood that he couldn't just rely on thought, but also had to use his will to guide it. The magic power, which usually moved at a certain speed, began to fluctuate towards a target. Recalling the scene of Black using magic power, an idea suddenly struck him. If magic power could grant human strength far beyond normal limits, could it also be used to enhance hearing? Although he still couldn't completely control the flow of magic power, breathing and guiding it through his body was still possible. When his strong will combined with the flow of magic power, the surrounding sounds suddenly became clearer, as if enlivened by magic. John moved from the dormitory to the main building. That beggar child, yes. Perhaps for that reason, the director was a bit reluctant. But it's worth it. The main building's manager glanced at John and nodded. The director continued. This arrangement is to ensure his safety. There was a bit of a problem in Sector 1 today. You mean people from the guild? 2 envoys came. John roughly guessed the identity of those strangers. Although he didn't know what a guild or envoys were, he was certain that they weren't from the Manson gang, as he had previously thought. Have they started to act already? They said it's about collecting 10 pieces of routine information. Nothing unusual should happen. Mr. Iger, that's right. The guild wouldn't care about a small place like ours. Then Iger nodded at John and said, "Kid, follow me." John had to follow again. They passed through the first floor hall. On the walls hung several portraits of figures he didn't know. John followed Iger's heavy breathing up the stairs to the second floor. In front of a room, Iger stopped. Creak. The heavy door was pushed open. "Aye, mommy. From today, I'll be taking care of you." Iger pushed John into the room. The woman sitting at the desk stood up. Ami had a neat, asymmetrical bob haircut. She still had a girlish air about her. She tucked a strand of hair that was obscuring one eye behind her ear and looked at John. "Ami, this is John from the dormitory, right? Seems he's a child favored by the director. To be precise, favored by the vice director. Anyway, it seems you can't read yet, can you? Do I still have to teach him literacy?" Ami sighed softly and asked John, "How old are you?" "I'm almost 10, ma'am. But you're completely illiterate?" "Yes, I've never learned." "I see. Well, you're a child from the dormitory, so we can't expect too much. You know the main building doesn't usually accept commoners, right?" John nodded. He had heard that only down-on-their-luck nobles, or illegitimate children, by donating a certain amount of money, could enter the main building. "From tomorrow, I will teach you to read. Then, you must call me teacher, or you can call me big sister, Chi. Although you're from the dormitory, you seem quite polite." John was a little flustered. On one hand, he didn't understand why they would use sibling terms. On the other hand, he was very curious about learning to read, as he had rarely heard of it before. "Yes. Why are you teaching me to read, ma'am?" "Why? Because you have to learn to read books aloud." John's eyes widened. "That's right. Joining a reading club, isn't that a necessary skill? Otherwise, what's the point of coming to the main building?" "Ma'am, what's a reading club?" Seeing this, Ami clicked her tongue helplessly and muttered, "I still have to teach him properly. Let's see how to go about it." Then she explained, a reading club, simply put, is when someone reads a book aloud for those present to hear. Authors of new books, or when nobles gather. They often hold them regularly in those circles. It's a high-class pastime, and you can earn quite a bit of money too. "Does the poorhouse also organize activities like this?" John asked, his eyes full of curiosity. "We often hold sponsored reading sessions in front of patrons. Outstanding children even get a chance for special readings." "Omi explicit. What are special readings?" John asked again. "Children who read well might get adopted. Children confirmed for adoption get to do private readings for their sponsors. But this is probably still a long way off for an illiterate child like you." Ami said, her tone gentle but frank. Hearing Ami's reasonable words, John could only nod in agreement. For some reason, he didn't feel scared, but rather found it somewhat novel, seeing the curious sparkle in John's eyes. Ami seemed to understand something. "The vice director must really like you. I've unintentionally said so much. You're truly adorable." Ami smiled and patted John's head. John, for a moment, didn't know how to respond. Ami stood up, went to the door, and said, "Follow me." John followed her down the hallway for a bit. Into the room she indicated. "This is John from the dormitory. Everyone, don't cause trouble. Be good to each other. John, you go to that empty bed over there," Ami said, gently pushing John towards the bed in the corner of the room. There were 5 beds in the room. One of them was empty. John could feel the eyes of the other children following him. He began to arrange his clothes in his wardrobe. This was the first time he'd had a wardrobe. As he put his few meager clothes inside, he felt a little awkward. At that moment, the door closed. "Are you really from the dorm?" a child asked. John nodded. "Wow, cool. It's the first time I've ever seen a kid from the dorm." Tao. This is Lily." Noah and Hayden, Theo introduced. The children who were introduced gently waved hello, smiling at John. They looked to be about John's age. But the atmosphere here was completely different from the dormitory, making John feel a bit out of place. "John," Theo said, "if you need any help, just say so. If you have any questions, just ask." "Really?" "Of course." Seeing Theo's bright smile, John decided to voice the questions in his heart. This was an important matter for him. "So, how do you all go to work?" Theo froze for a moment, then quickly reacted, asking back, "Are you talking about going begging? You've come to the main building. Why would you still do that? For us, reading books is our work. That's why we have to study." "Well then, welcome to our group, John," Theo said in a friendly tone. That evening, John recalled what Pauline had told him about books. All the world's knowledge is contained within them. John is very curious, so he'll surely like them. "Wow, I really want to read them. My dream has come true," John thought. The next day, John was reading a book. "Let me see. Give me the book you read today." Ami said, "The Closing Song of the Wise Summoner, The Sweet Taste of the Hairy Bride's Pearl." She was speechless for a moment, then said, "Let's move on from children's stories to books in section 2, okay?" Ami suggested. "Yes, well done," Ami praised. "Thank you, Miss Ami. Now I can read books in section 2. John said happily, "Excuse me, before I go back to the dorm, could I stay and read a little longer?" John asked. "Yes, you may. Go ahead," Ami agreed. Section 2. All the adult books were gathered here. John stepped inside, feeling like he was entering a new world where he could explore countless pieces of knowledge and interesting stories. It's surely full of fascinating things inside. This one looks interesting. So does that one, and that one too. The guilds of the Raptun Kingdom and the formation of guild. John found a very captivating book. "So, I've always lived in such a small and remote place. One of the Grafton duchies, after winning a long war, restructured the world into a kingdom with a system of 6 autonomous duchies to prevent the recurrence of war, to maintain community welfare and security. The king established an organization, namely the guild. They have strived for peace and stability for over 200 years. They were supposed to be the good guys. So why did people like Brett run away? Just because begging isn't good? But he had a pretty good relationship with the local officials, didn't he? What's certain is that the orphanage and the guild don't have a good relationship. And for some reason, the orphanage kept what happened that day a secret. That day, John was wiping the bookshelves while sensing his mana. Although he wasn't completely proficient yet, he could already circulate his mana while moving. Previously, when I was working, I could still sit still and absorb mana. But now, the situation is different. I've been practicing nonstop just to be able to circulate mana while moving. Thanks to diligent practice, I can circulate mana while moving. Even while reading books, I can do it, no doubt. But why does my mana never accumulate? It's always so little. This is really disappointing. But I can only try it step by step. Time passed, and spring became more vibrant. Reading sessions were held almost daily. Each reading session had 25 children participate. They took turns reading passages from books. The way the reader of the day was chosen was quite special. It all started with a morning roll call. Under the guidance of Army, the reading club manager, the children lined up in front of Ma Sin's room. John was also among the anxious children. A moment later, the headmistress, that is, the vice-headmistress, appeared. She wore a magnificent lace-trimmed dress. The brooch on her chest caught John's eye. The vice-headmistress slowly walked down the hallway, carefully observing each child. Now, let's see which children will become candidates for today's reading. She would select 10 children as reading candidates based on their physical condition, their appearance on that day, as well as the personality and preferences of the visiting sponsor. These children would prepare themselves and wait in the reception room. The guest would choose the reader of the day from these candidates. Next, Lily. No, the children whose names were called couldn't hide their joy. First, one had to become a reading candidate to have a chance to become the special reader. As for John, since he wasn't chosen as a candidate, he wasn't even allowed to enter the reception room to observe. However, he didn't really long for it much, because there were still many books in the library he wanted to read. To be precise, he didn't really want to leave the orphanage. Just as he was lost in thought, John heard the last name called, and it was his own. Yes, not only John, most of the children were very surprised. The vice headmistress continued, "You've only read children's books. I can't let you participate in the reading club yet. If you read incorrectly, our situation will become very difficult." "Yes, I understand, vice headmistress." John replied very politely, smiling. The vice headmistress stared at his face. He trembled slightly, but didn't dare show his emotions. "However, if you could go, it would certainly be good. So today, go there and get a feel for the atmosphere." Thank you for your consideration, vice headmistress. I will study hard." Army smiled and gently pushed John. He clapped his hands and said directly, "You 10 children, change your clothes and gather in the reception room." John clearly felt the jealous gazes from the children who weren't chosen. Initially, some were skeptical about him being chosen, but they soon quickly accepted it. John combed his messy hair and wiped his face. He put on clean and tidy clothes. He hurried into the reception room, his hand caressing the high-quality clothes he was wearing for the first time in his life. "Wow." John couldn't help but let out a gasp of amazement. Army looked at him and smiled gently. "John, sit down." John did as he was told, found a chair in the row of neatly arranged chairs, and sat down. His eyes scanned the room. It was decorated with luxurious furnishings that he had never seen before. Everything was arranged exquisitely and harmoniously. With a click, Army opened the door and told the children, "Get ready. The guest has arrived." Under the guidance of the director and the vice headmistress, guests in splendid formal attire entered the hall. They were the sponsors of the orphanage. They comfortably sat down on the chairs facing the children. The children smiled, eagerly waiting to be chosen. John was no exception. Suddenly, his eyes met those of a noble lady. "It's you?" The two recognized each other instantly. It was her, indeed, the one who had given him a lot of money when he was begging on the streets. Her striking face and that white hair made her unforgettable to him. John, overjoyed, grinned widely and greeted her. "Hello, Mom. I'm so happy to see you here. I've always been grateful for your help that day." "Oh my goodness, Lady Caroline. Do you know her, John?" "His name is John. Last winter, I saw him begging at the Bristol crossroads. He was already very endearing back then." Lady Caroline replied excitedly. Then she turned to John and asked, "It's been a long time, child. I was very worried. It's a good thing you're still here." And before John could reply, the vice headmistress quickly interjected. She was worried John might say something inappropriate. "He has done very well. Look at him. Before, though thin, he was already very lovable. Now, he's even more remarkable. Yes, thanks to your support, we've been able to pay special attention to the children's health and education. John has also learned to read and write here." "Really? In that case, today could I perhaps ask this boy to read this book for me?" Caroline smiled cheerfully, handing the book she brought to the vice headmistress. On the vice headmistress's face, a hint of awkwardness flickered. Just by looking at the title, she felt that John would probably find this book difficult to understand. "Well, John has only just learned to read. I was planning to just let him observe today." "Really? What a pity. I really wanted to hear his expressive reading." "If you really want to hear him, then let's have him read the last chapter." The boy is indeed still inexperienced, but for him, this would also be a good experience. John took a deep breath and began to read the final chapter. From the very first sentence, his trembling, emotionally charged voice captured everyone's attention. All eyes were fixed on John's face, where his dry lips moved unceasingly. In the quiet hall, only John's reading voice echoed. No one dared to make a sound. Everyone listened intently. John paused for a moment to compose his emotions, focusing more on the flow of mana circulating within his body. Not only the vice headmistress, everyone present felt it, the sound from all directions, as if it were piercing their hearts. The sponsors were all astonished by the deep emotion John conveyed. Even the director, who usually only cared about personal gain, couldn't help but be moved. "Please continue reading." Caroline took out a handkerchief, wiped her tears, and urged him on, unable to hold back. John continued to read the next sentence, and the miraculous phenomenon continued. Mana intertwined with the sound, and the sound, in turn, propelled the mana. Under the gentle sunlight, the image of John reading was truly touching. Everyone seemed captivated, their eyes and ears focused on him. John wanted to better understand the effect of the phenomenon he created on his listeners. As the sound spread throughout the room, creating a resonance, John used his circulating mana to enhance the acuity of his 5 senses. Ever since he could concentrate his mana and overhear the manager's conversations, his hearing had significantly improved. I can hear all the sounds, he thought. Sometimes a soft sigh, the sound of 2 hands clasped tightly, the bite of a lip, tears streaming down skin, and even the different heartbeats of each person. Based on the audience's reactions he perceived, John adjusted his tone, pace, and emotional intensity. As sound turned into ripples, mana continuously affected the listeners. The story gradually reached its climax. Oh, it's truly wonderful. John marveled at the mana flowing over the people captivated by his reading, crying, laughing, joyful, or angry. He slowly closed the final chapter of the book he was reading for the first time. A silence followed, until John smiled at his listeners. Finally, gasps of admiration and applause erupted, becoming the focal point of the sponsored reading session. John expressed his gratitude for the endless praise from everyone. This was a wonderful time. Your reading was truly wonderful, Caroline said. Thank you, Lady Caroline. Because you were listening, I could concentrate more while reading. John replied, How are you so polite and articulate? You must have been taught very well. John thought to himself, it's all thanks to reading books on etiquette and communication skills. But he smiled brightly and said, It's all thanks to the care of the director and the vice director. You see, these words from John brought the director and vice director an unprecedented amount in donations, and his reward was being allowed to read freely. In the library, after dinner, John stayed alone in library section 2. He entered the section displaying books on life, physiology, and nature. I need to learn more about the body, how it works and reacts. After all, mana is controlled by the body and will. John took out books one by one, and his gaze fell upon a book titled, Understanding Sexuality. He had no particular thoughts about it, just considered it another book of the same genre. He flipped through it, thinking it might be useful. Suddenly, you noticed familiar mana fluctuations. Heading towards the library, he stopped and turned his head to look. Sure enough, the person who entered was Black. Hey, John, I heard you did exceptionally well at the sponsored reading today. Hello, Black. It's a shame. Were you busy with work at that time? Since John couldn't leave the main building, Black often came to check on him. Black approached, smiled brightly, and ruffled John's hair. I was wondering why you picked up reading skills so quickly. Turns out you've been practicing nonstop. What are you reading there? Hey. Black glanced at the book John was holding and grinned mischievously. You're reading Understanding Sexuality, huh? You've started getting interested in these things lately, haven't you? Haha, well, it's natural. You're at that curious age. No matter how much you flip through books, you can't learn these things from them. They can only be learned from real experience. You must be very busy. That's right. Those people who chased you before suddenly started causing trouble again. I told you before, they're mercenaries hired by the Manson gang. Manson gang. Right. Although Black said that, John knew well that those people were actually from the guild. Black nodded. Yes, they've started bothering me again. So I have to go deal with this with some of the managers. John clenched his fists and said, If you step in, Black, they'll surely be taught a lesson. John had always thought Black was a bad guy with countless suspicious actions when he was a prefect. However, toward John, Black always acted kindly. Of course, he still occasionally played small pranks as before, but it seemed Black always paid attention to John's every move. I know Black is a bad guy, but he treats me well. So, should I consider him a good person? And what about the guild? I know they're supposed to be a righteous organization, but what if they do something detrimental to me? For a moment, John imagined a battle between those proficient in mana. Then a question flashed through his mind. How strong am I? He had never experienced a real battle before. Just intimidating the kids in the dorm was all he'd done. Besides carrying heavy things for short periods, he had never used mana to confront anyone. The question was how to attack. Unfortunately, the library had no books on how to fight. Magic power temporarily surged into his muscles, enhancing his strength. Rip. The book was torn in half. Even for an adult, this would be very difficult, let alone for a child. He felt a little regretful. The sex education book had been accidentally torn in half. After John's first reading session, the number of visitors to the orphanage skyrocketed. The number of participants in the book club nearly doubled compared to usual. In just one day, rumors spread widely. There were even absurd rumors, like if you just came to the orphanage, an angel would read novels to you. Madame Caroline, who was believed to be the source of the rumors, made a bold request to the orphanage. Today, John will be the main reader, right? If possible, let him read alone. I think if there are other distracting sounds, people will lose interest. The vice director sought out John and explained this difficult situation. That's how it is. See if you can do it. Her tone was very gentle, but John understood that no matter what, he had to find a way to do it. John smiled brightly. Yes, I'll try. Don't worry, man. You're such a good child. John was just following instructions, but hosting a reading session alone, sponsored by patrons, was unprecedented. That evening, the vice director gathered everyone to announce the chosen reader, especially the children who stared intently at the face of the one they were expecting, their eyes full of anxiety. However, the one chosen this time was Theo. Everyone congratulated him. Contrary to the children's expectations, the one whose name was called was Theo, not John. Theo was also stunned, flustered, awkwardly raising a hand to his face. It wasn't until he saw the radiant smile of the vice director and the cheers and congratulatory applause from the other children that he beamed with joy, watching him being led away. His roommates were all happy for Theo. John thought to himself, Theo is a good kid. He helped me adapt to life in the main building. Although there was no emotional connection between them, deep enough to be called friends, John would remember Theo as a kind and gentle boy. With his reading voice, he'll surely be adopted by a good family. The next day, for John's special reading session, the number of visitors was even greater than the day before. So much so that getting into the reception room where the reading took place became difficult. The vice director approached John again. John, today we have no choice but to split the reading session into 2, morning and afternoon. What do you think? So, I have to read twice in one day. This will be quite physically demanding. But what other choice is there? Everyone wants to hear you read. I'm truly grateful that people enjoy my reading. I'm very happy. However, John suddenly put on a sad expression, which startled the vice director. Are you worried about something? Tell me. John looked at the vice director and asked carefully, well, during the break, can I go outside to get some fresh air? After finishing a chapter, I feel mentally exhausted. I'm worried this will affect my afternoon reading session. The vice director felt she had asked too much and felt a bit guilty. Of course, go ahead and do that. The morning reading session ended. John received special permission from the vice director. Since coming to the main building, this was the first time he had stepped out into the outside world. The condition was that he couldn't leave the main building's backyard, but that was enough. He felt the warm spring sunlight on him, the gentle breeze carrying a faint fragrance, and the hovering magic power. John stood there quietly for a moment, breathing deeply, immersing himself in the world around him. Although the morning reading session had moved many people to tears, as the reader, he didn't feel tired at all. It was just an excuse for the vice director. He just wanted to continue his training in an open space. Then he visualized a virtual image of his body in his mind and superimposed on it the flow of magic power that he observed with his third eye. Now, using blood vessels as a reference, the path of the magic flow was clearly divided. Now, if I combine movements with the flow of magic power, moving bones, joints, and muscles to perform specific actions, then the fluctuations of magic power will naturally connect. The once independent movements gradually merge into one. Magic power circulated from top to bottom, then spread to where it was needed. He repeated this many times so that the process would occur naturally. Other aspects were fine. Of course, the problem lay in the concentration of magic power. John tried to compress all the magic power into his vessel, creating a dazzling scene in the backyard. The only problem was that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't fill the magic vessel. Does the problem lie with this thing called a body? John faced a dilemma. Should he expand his magic vessel or reinforce it to make it sturdier? He wasn't sure if this was a result of maturation or simply due to physical training and increased endurance. Looking back at the achievements, made since discovering the magic breathing method. John realized that reaching Black's level in a short time was almost impossible. In other words, the amount of magic power accumulated in his body was still far from matching Black's. He couldn't help but recall the guild's pursuit event when Black brought him to the orphanage. I almost walked by myself then. At that time, his magic concentration was no different from an ordinary person's. That was his condition after continuously depleting his magic reserves without being able to recover, because the guild members pursuing him had also done the same thing for about the same amount of time. Could it be reasonably inferred that they share the same weakness in using magic power? The amount of accumulated magic power might differ, but if one could continuously absorb magic power from the outside world, then in the long run, one could gain an advantage. Fortunately, John had been training this way, but his thoughts shifted in another direction. Is it possible to use the magic power of the outside world as my own? Not like that. I wouldn't need to just focus on magic concentration anymore. To do this, one first had to be able to impose one's will on the magic power outside the body. I can infuse sound into magic power. I can also use sound to separate magic power. So, is it possible to give magic power weight or form? Then, John picked a small leaf, placed it on his palm, and focused his mind. He tried to circulate magic power throughout his body. Then, like emitting sound from his mouth, he directly released it through his skin. With a very slight vibration, the leaf began to float. This special reading session will be done by Lily. Let's all congratulate her. Congratulations, Lily. You must take care of yourself when you go out. It wasn't until she heard John's words that Lily realized she was about to leave the orphanage. Lily only glanced at John, so much so that she didn't even hear her name being called out. Do you have anything you want to say? Lily hesitated, not knowing what to say. Just as she was about to express herself, she was interrupted. Lily's good too, but I can't believe John wasn't chosen. People around them said the director wouldn't let him go anywhere. Don't you know the story of the goose that lays golden eggs? So they're deliberately keeping him because he can make money. Oh, sorry, Lily. Could you say that again? Oh, it's nothing. Lily, flustered and with reddened eyes, left. They say if I can leave, I'll go to a good family. John thought, that way, I'll be able to read new books, experience a wider world. I might even find clues about magic accumulation. I don't know when that will happen, but I'm a little curious. This is very easy now. Good. If I continue practicing like this. He picked up a pencil, twirling it in his palm. John sensed a strange flow of magic power and immediately focused his gaze in that direction. A moment later, a man staggered over the high wall next to the main building. Where he slid down, he left a red streak on the wall. That's Harry. He was one of the managers of the dormitory building. Since he wasn't in charge of related matters, John didn't know much about him, but he remembered Harry's face and name. But Harry didn't have a missing arm back then. John unconsciously ran towards Harry. The magic power on Harry was weakening. John felt he needed to help him. At the same time, Iger was now rushing past John at an incredible speed. Iger reached Harry's side first and then gestured to John. It's okay, don't worry. Go back to the main building. John stood there just nodding without replying. At the same time, he focused on listening, trying to hear their conversation clearly. But they moved too fast. He couldn't overhear anything. The events that followed not only confused John, but also many other children. During lunch, before the sponsored reading session in the afternoon, the director and vice director suddenly disappeared, leaving the sponsors unattended. A moment laté, Ami entered the dining hall and announced to the sponsors, who were disgruntled by the cold treatment, this afternoon's sponsored reading session has been canceled. Please return home immediately. The children watched the sponsors and visitors being almost chased out, tilting their heads in confusion. This was unprecedented. John, this is a special reading session. Go get ready. Go wash your face and put on the clothes that have been prepared. I'll wait for you outside. John didn't say much, just did as she said. When John appeared, he was neatly dressed and looked very handsome. The corners of his eyes were slightly downcast, his usually serious expression now tinged with a few shades of melancholy. John was trying to sort through the information he had gathered in his mind, recalling the scene he had witnessed earlier. Are we going straight to the annex building? John asked. Yes, the situation is different today. Does Madame Caroline want to adopt me? No, it's someone else. Who is it? Ami seemed a little distracted when answering John, then shook her head and turned around. Let's go. Follow me. John used his magic power to sense his surroundings, but at least below the second floor, he couldn't sense any adult's magic power. It was as if everyone had abandoned the main building and gone elsewhere. This silence truly made John a bit tense. He tried his best to heighten his senses, hearing, sight, smell, and even his third eye used for tracking magic power. Like that, he followed Ami along a small path flanked by dense trees. At the end of the path was an annex building. John thought to himself, this place is full of darkness and chaotic magic power, just like the chaotic magic on Black. Just then, the door creaked open, just as they had foreseen. The one who opened the door was Iger. "Welcome, John," Iger said, but Ami was left outside the door. Only John stepped inside. Through the crack in the door, Ami could be seen forcing a smile, but that smile looked sad. The door immediately slammed shut. Iger blocked the way. A terrible pressure descended. As long as that big guy was here, getting out wouldn't be easy. John stopped, then instinctively stepped forward, his gaze thoughtfully fixed on the ground. Before him appeared a giant pentagon, almost the size of the entire annex building. Upon closer inspection, he realized it wasn't a simple drawing, but an intricate pattern made from colorful stones. John slowly approached the chair, placed at the apex of the pentagon, opposite where he was standing. On the chair, an old leather-bound book lay silently. "Do I have to read this book?" John wondered. He sat down, placed the book on his lap, and took a deep breath, entering the unfamiliar, dark space filled with chaotic magic power. John's mood was a mixture of calmness and excitement. Suddenly, John inadvertently glanced towards the center of the hall. Fortunately, when his third eye was slightly distracted, his keen hearing came into play. He heard faint whispers, echoing from ahead and above. It was covered by a thin, opaque film, obscuring the view. This wasn't an ordinary physical film, but an invisible membrane woven from dense magical energy, fragile and chaotic. That's why, no matter how one looked, it was impossible to distinguish anything beneath it. It just felt like a pitch-black mass of light. I've never seen such a large mass of magical energy. I can't even guess what it is. Just then, as John began to read, a voice echoed from above. The other children also began to read. In an atmosphere like this, images of Theo and Lily appeared in John's mind. He straightened up and opened his book. "I can't let this pit suck away all my magical energy. I'll try to absorb the magical energy floating around and control its flow." Within that pitch-black and chaotic mass of magical energy, John felt an undeniable emotion, a desolate sadness, extreme suffering, and a complex sorrow, or perhaps longing, profound longing, and a sorrowful resignation. "I did it. I've completely controlled the flow of magical energy. Now I just need to stall for time." He acted because he didn't feel any new magical energy approach. Maybe the guild hasn't reached that building yet. I have to prolong the reading time. Although he slowly turned the pages of the book to stall for time, no one interfered with his reading. But another hour passed. It's almost been 2 hours. From above, a suspicious voice was vaguely heard. "Isn't it reading for too long?" "Huh, is that book very long?" "I get it. The harvest should be enough, right? Isn't there still time? So why is it still so vigorous?" When he saw Igor using a large door bolt to block the entrance, it was clear that he was also aware of the situation outside. John had a feeling the guild members had arrived. Their purpose was still unclear, but at least they were better than the foul, sacrificial farm that drained magical energy from his body. Perhaps this special reading session would have to wait until the magical energy, the source of life, was completely drained before it ended. Just need to hold on a little longer. The situation will change soon. He didn't know if this change would be beneficial for him or not. He could only try his best. A thought sprang into his mind. Then he concentrated the flow of magical energy around him, forming a barrier to prevent his magical energy from being drained. Finally, he did it. Now, they can have me read all day if they want. Let them try. And so a long time passed. The director and vice director saw him still calmly reading his book and couldn't understand it all. They wanted to absorb enough magical energy to activate a teleportation array to escape. The guild members were sweeping through. John was still using his mana to sense everything. Suddenly, the entire building shook, startling him a bit. The door was about to be broken down. The blonde-haired man now had to use a large stone statue to block the entrance. Then he quickly ran deeper inside. He seemed to have forgotten John was still sitting there. Just then, John finally stepped onto the stairs. At the foot of the spiral staircase, along with a loud noise. Igor, why has it suddenly come to this? What's going on? Why is it like this? What a mess. Did you guys do something wrong? Regarding matters like this, aren't you more aware than us? Igor, who was always calm, now his voice was loud and sharp, while the other two were extremely scared. John didn't know what had happened downstairs, but strong curiosity and an incomprehensible attraction made John go down. Without any hesitation, he gradually felt the damp air, faintly smelling of decay and the stench of blood. The structure of the basement was identical to the hall of the annex building. The only difference was that the air here was filled with magical energy, dark and dense, even more so than upstairs. Why is there a tree in the basement? This is a strange tree. It itself was a mass of black magical energy. The black magical energy was gathering. John looked straight at it. A large structure, like a statue composed of innumerable human figures, stood before him. So, John slowly walked towards the tree. In this chaotic scene, he got closer to the tree. Only then did John clearly see the true form of this tree. As he got closer, the sight made him freeze. Among the countless anguished faces was Mother Helen, who had taken care of him as a child. Her body was pierced by a long spear. It was also the place from which the dense black magical energy emanated. He immediately realized that in reality, no one ever left this place. The children and Mother Pauline weren't adopted. They were actually murdered by them. In this basement, John's face darkened, filled with resentment. It wasn't until Igor grabbed John's head and pulled him up that John noticed him. He didn't even feel the pain, as if he had returned from the dead. The only thing he could do was look at his pitiful mother figure, Pauline. Pauline was covered by the dark and chaotic magical energy. Igor heard a noise, turned around, and shouted, "Black, what happened?" Igor asked. "I'd like to know too." Black replied. Igor reached his hand towards Black. In his hand, he held a small fruit, withered, yet radiating a bright color. Igor stammered an explanation, his voice full of fear. John finished reading, "The bastard, and yet he's still not dead. I don't know when he snuck down here." Black tilted his head, looked from John to the fruit, then interrupted. "Igor, you've done something useless and foolish." Black placed his hand on the hilt of a long sword piercing Pauline's chest. Immediately, Black's chaotic magical energy began to fluctuate, traveling down his arm, through the sword, and into Pauline's body. John's eyes widened. All the memories, recollections of before. Turns out he was just an animal. As if to test the sword's sharpness, Black swung it towards one of Pauline's tree-like limbs. Pauline's arm was severed and fell to the ground, but John heard nothing. This was the first time he had felt such intense anger. His muscles and tendons twitched uncontrollably. His circulating magical energy also became chaotic. Instinctively, John raised both hands and grabbed Igor's wrists. He broke Igor's bones and tore his muscles, like tearing a thick book in half. Igor fell to the ground. This was the first time he had killed someone. John, now holding a sword in his hand, heard a noise behind him. He turned his head in surprise. Black saw John advancing towards him. "It seems blood relations aren't just empty words, but it's even more terrifying than I imagined. It seems you've awakened your magical power, John," Black said. But John paid him no mind. He walked straight towards the tree behind Black. Blood, like from a tree branch, was still flowing from Pauline's chest. He didn't know if it was Pauline's blood or the blood of the tree connected to her, just like what she had once done for him, as if transferring her heart to his. John, tears falling, placed his hand on Pauline's chest. Immediately, the chaotic magical energy from Pauline collided with the magical energy surrounding John's body. John focused on the flow of magical energy from the whole to its parts, from its parts to even smaller components. Why was she crying? Blood. What are these terrible memories? Certain thoughts invaded John's body and mind. It was complete darkness. Someone's thoughts, or rather, a desire, or an illusion, or an unfulfilled future. Fragmented memories, as if abruptly cut off, echoed in his mind, full of despair. Tens of thousands of people he had never met were dead. The survivors screamed around them. In the midst of all this was a young man in a black, scarred suit. As soon as John realized it was his future self, the chaotic magical energy was once again tinged with light. Pure, as if stepping out of the vision, his face full of anguish. Tears streamed down, his face in two lines. Then, suddenly the excess energy coalesced, settling into his heart. swirling intensely with a deep hum. "What is this?" John placed his hand on his chest, his thoughtful gaze directed at Pauline's heart. That heart now seemed warmer than ever, radiating a gentle yet powerful light. Thanks to this, the rage and sorrow that had just filled his mind vanished. The negative thoughts invading his body were also purified. John saw this strange phenomenon as a gift from Pauline's love. For him, perhaps only now, did the words she once spoke truly manifest. And so, Pauline remained forever in John's heart. At this moment, Black, since when, had pointed his sword at John's neck. "This tearful reunion is over. John, do you know? Waiting is boring." Black was pointing the tip of his sword straight at him. "I waited only because it was you. I intended to take you with me because you're smarter than you look. It's all because of those fools. Everything's ruined. But, oh well, it doesn't matter. So tell me, do you want to come with me, or do you intend to die here in silence? Killing you would be a waste." John just listened silently, his face devoid of expression. He spoke coldly, his tone unwavering. "Where do you intend to take me?" Black slightly raised an eyebrow, a glint of smugness in his eyes, seemingly quite pleased with John's unexpected question. "You might be taken to another farm. There, you'll take care of a group of children, plant trees. You'll work under me, learn a trade to make a living, and officially become a member of the Later clan." Later. John immediately became wary. The word later that the director had mentioned to Igor before was now repeated by Black. He was almost certain that later was the organization Black and Igor belonged to, and those horrific crimes were surely committed by them. John, without any fear, asked directly, "What exactly is later?" Black revealed a mysterious expression, his tone fervent. "It is the organization to which I am loyal. Our leader has a grand ambition, to use dark magic to rewrite the world order, and we, these people, are his most loyal followers. To serve him is the highest honor." John coldly asked, "The cruel act of turning people into trees, that was done by your accomplices, wasn't it?" Black sneered contemptuously. "How could I have such skill? I'm only in charge of cleaning up the things created by high-level mages." John unhesitatingly refused. "I don't want to go with you." Black's face immediately darkened. He slowly raised his sword, its tip aimed straight at John. His voice was menacing. "So you seek death?" He thrust the sword straight at John with lightning speed. But the scene that followed made him unable to believe his eyes. Lightning-like energy easily blocked his sword thrust. John, using only 2 fingers, effortlessly caught the blow. When he applied force, the sword blade instantly shattered, fragments flying back towards Black's body. He clutched his chest in pain and knelt on the floor. John gave him no chance to retaliate. With a light flick of his hand, the previously broken sword tip slashed across his neck. "Die, you dog." But John, looking at his corpse, murmured softly, "Once a heart is pierced, it disappears forever. Perhaps I shouldn't have done that, but I don't regret it. I will never forgive what you've done, until all those like you are destroyed." This act did not stem from revenge, or any noble mission. It was simply that John couldn't bear the pain that Pauline had endured. John looked at the sword fragment hovering in midair. As if sentient, it slowly drifted towards him, circling his shoulder like a companion. In that moment, a complex emotion surged within John. He didn't know if it was his own will, or the power Pauline had bestowed from the other side. Suddenly, John sensed another stream of magical energy slowly moving down the stairs. It was a brilliant and distinct sphere of light. John suddenly understood. He guessed the person's identity. He slowly turned around. The man was neat, the sword at his hip almost as tall as he was. The man glanced around, ordering the subordinates behind him, "I will question this child. You all check the surrounding area thoroughly." The 4 men in black suits immediately dispersed, beginning to inspect the surroundings. Meanwhile, the mustached man slowly approached John. John also silently observed him, assessing him from head to toe. The man asked, "Do you live in this poor house?" "Yes." John calmly replied, "Yes." The man's gaze swept over the sword, fragments revolving around John's shoulder, curiosity evident on his face. "Your ability is quite interesting. Is that psychokinesis?" John shook his head slightly. "I don't know." The man frowned and continued to ask, "Have you studied magic at Later?" John replied without hesitation, "I've never studied, and I'm not from Later. A hint of suspicion flashed in the man's eyes. You haven't studied? Then where does your magical power come from? John said calmly, I figured out how to use magical power on my own. The man was momentarily speechless, feeling like the conversation was off kilter. But strangely, even though John's answers were somewhat puzzling, he had a feeling that John wasn't lying. I am Oscar, Vice Captain of the Union Faith Department. I am John. The Faith Department uses coordinated sword techniques to handle information, intelligence, and reconnaissance. You were a gold badge, so you're from an S-rank team? Oscar nodded, inwardly assessing John several notches higher. He silently marveled. This child is truly extraordinary. He was supposed to be the one interrogated, yet he managed to lead the entire conversation. John, first, let's go outside to talk. Can you put away those sword fragments? John looked at the sword fragment hovering and shimmering in front of Oscar, then held out his hand. The sword fragment, as if summoned, fell into John's palm, without any hindrance. John gently twirled the fragment in his hand, while Oscar observed silently, trying to find clues from the boy's actions. Just then, one of Oscar's subordinates came forward to report. 4 adults have just died. Considering the size of this tree and the number of sacrificed children piled up behind it, it seems the tree was created less than 2 years ago, but for some unknown reason, the magic ritual was interrupted midway. The disruption of the ritual also seems to have been done recently. While Oscar was speaking, John quietly moved away from him, heading towards the back of the tree. John went around behind the tree. The sight before him left him stunned. Before a wall of death, countless children's bodies lay scattered. Clearly, the most recently sacrificed children were closest to the tree. John immediately recognized Theo and Lily. Their pale faces cut into John's heart. No, John whispered, his voice full of regret. I'm sorry, Tao. I should have spent more time with you. Lily, when you left, I should have treated you more gently. I am truly sorry. A moment later, without turning back, John asked the approaching Oscar, Vice Captain, have you been to many farms like this before? Yes. Oscar replied briefly. Yes. John continued, so, in the future, will you continue to go to places like this? After speaking, John turned around, his eyes filled with determination. Oscar was slightly surprised by John's expression. He had thought that upon witnessing his friends' deaths, even if John didn't cry, he would show sadness. But now, John's eyes only held determination. Oscar nodded. Yes, eliminating Later's farms is one of the key missions of our guild. John nodded slightly, smiled, and said, then, can you let me go with you? I want to go with everyone to Later's farms. He looked at John for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Normally, taking a child on a guild mission is unreasonable. Oscar thought for a moment and said, let's investigate first. I'll consider your request later. Follow me. John noticed on the vice principal's body. Wasn't that the badge his mother had always worn? He quickly retrieved what was rightfully his. Outside the auxiliary building, Oscar and John stood side by side as subordinates hurried past, continuously reporting the situation to Oscar. In this attack, the church suffered no casualties. It's confirmed that 13 people from Later's side died. 3 people from the poorhouse died. It's presumed 2 escaped. It seems the priests and high-ranking officials were only involved in the initial preparations for the ritual. The reason for the ritual's failure is still unclear. We have requested assistance from Stabilization Bureau Number 4 for detailed analysis. End of report. Well done. After hearing the report, Oscar turned to ask John, what do you feel most comfortable here? Oscar signaled his subordinates to withdraw and said to John, lead the way. John immediately headed towards the main building. Oscar asked, I don't think there are any books on mana cultivation or magic application here. What did you learn on your own? Yes, John replied confidently. I figured it out myself. Oscar was a little surprised. Just like that, John didn't hesitate. Yes, I'm very smart. Seeing John's confident expression, the corner of Oscar's mouth twitched slightly. Oscar said, I can tell you're not lying. Moreover, you are very smart. So now, tell me your story. From your earliest experiences to what just happened there. John warned beforehand, it will be a very long story. Then John slowly began to recount his experiences. His story seemed to have a magical quality, touching Oscar's heart. Although John didn't reveal that he could see magical power or the details of his mana cultivation process, Oscar was still completely engrossed in it. It was a fascinating story, hard to believe and also deeply tragic. A moment later, John said, so, I think it was Mother Pauline who gave me this power. Oscar looked at the sword fragment hovering over John's right shoulder, nodded, and replied, "All right." But in truth, he still didn't fully understand the cause. A child who had never learned mana cultivation could use magical power and even defeated Iago, who was much older than him, and then faced Black. Someone even Oscar knew was talented, a magic swordsman, whose power was on par with, or even greater than an envoy's. Yet John defeated him easily. Moreover, he showed no signs of fatigue. Such talent would surely not be overlooked. John hesitated a little before asking, "Since you've listened to so much of my story, may I ask you a question?" Oscar was slightly surprised by the boy's confidence. After all, John was the sole survivor of a serious incident, yet he could still ask such questions so innocently. Oscar looked at John with a puzzled expression, then nodded and said, "Go ahead and ask." John asked, "What are those trees?" Oscar replied, "That is a dark magic system created by later, based on human lives." But John said, "But everyone said it was a type of fruit. Even the vice principal said so." From John's way of questioning and his attitude, it seemed he truly knew nothing about these trees. Oscar continued to explain, "They absorb magical power and form very precious crystals, because it's like a concentrated essence of magical power. And magical power is the foundation of life." "Yes," John thought for a moment, then asked, "So, it's a fruit that contains human lives?" Oscar affirmed, "That's right. That's exactly what they create." Saying that, Oscar took out a withered fruit and gave it to John. John took it, feeling the essence of his own magical power within the fruit, although the amount was small. But the concentration was clearly much higher than the magical power in the air. He couldn't help but wonder, "Can this be eaten?" Oscar replied, "Yes. It's called a later fruit. It's very expensive on the black market." John's insights greatly impressed Oscar, and Oscar's affability also made John feel comfortable. "May I continue to ask questions?" "Of course." John then asked, "What is psychokinesis?" Oscar explained, "I thought of that when I saw you make the sword fragment fly. You use psychokinesis, a type of magic." "Oh, right." John suddenly understood. "So, it's also a kind of magic. I still don't quite understand magic." As he spoke, he slowly moved his finger, making the sword fragment fly back and forth in the air. The speed and timing were precisely controlled, although the sword fragment was very small and light. In terms of refinement and efficiency, it was quite good. Oscar was inwardly surprised. No incantation needed. Although this is only level 1 psychokinesis, it's very difficult to judge solely by level. Though he is young, his aptitude and abilities are both outstanding, almost incomprehensible. Oscar asked, "Are you really only 10 years old?" "Yes," John replied. "Yes. You were betrayed by people who treated you well. Why do you trust the guild?" John thought for a moment. "I don't completely trust it, but..." John looked at Oscar's source of magical power and said slowly, "Vice Captain Oscar, your magical power is so pure and brilliant. Based on my experience and intuition, I believe you are a person with a noble soul." Oscar was slightly surprised by this compliment. This was the first time someone had commented on his magical power in such a way. Oscar asked, "Just for this reason, you trust and want to follow us. Isn't that a bit hasty?" Oscar agreed inwardly, but he still stated clearly, "First, if you want to join our Squad 5, the decision cannot be made lightly. Even if I allow you to come along, you are not allowed to interfere with our work." John quickly asked, "So I can't help at all?" John worried, "Is my ability not enough? I can use both magical power and psychokinesis." Oscar said seriously, "There are things more important than ability." He saw John's sad expression. Oscar was startled, wondering if he had said something wrong. He hurriedly explained, "No, John, what I mean is..." Oscar's tone was a little impatient. He continued, "It's not that you have a problem. It's just that making an exception isn't that simple. This isn't your fault. Don't be discouraged. You're just too young. Is age more important than ability?" John looked up, a mysterious look in his eyes, gazing directly at Oscar, as if reminding him that he had defeated Iago and Beck. Oscar shook his head slightly, explaining, "When making decisions, the guild doesn't just consider ability, but also needs deep thoughts, based on accumulated experience. And experience often comes with age. So you think because I'm young, my thinking is shallow?" John said in a calm voice, his innocent face showing a hint of doubt. Oscar sighed inwardly, sensing this would be a long discussion. "It's too early to conclude now. We've only been talking for a few hours. Consider this a probationary interview. Why did you kill Iago? He only grabbed your hair, didn't he?" just like killing the principal. At that moment, he looked like he wanted to smash your head in. Black was also staring from the side. I didn't have time to hesitate, and I certainly couldn't leave any loose ends. John said at a calm pace. Oscar asked in a stern voice, but you killed 2 people. When you made the decision, weren't you swayed by emotions? John looked straight at Oscar, unwavering. Anger and sadness are inevitable, but the tragic state of the victims prove that their crimes were unforgivable. Even if they repented, no one would forgive them. When they take others' lives, they should expect retribution. He continued solemnly. I have also become a murderer. If someone wants to hold me accountable, I have nothing to say. Then was it really necessary to kill them? Isn't there someone else to do this job? Isn't that why the guild exists? I couldn't save the innocent in time when I was younger. He sighed softly. What you said are precisely the tenets of the guild. The guild. This union was formed to realize that ideal. An organization built upon fundamental values. But in reality, the ideal that the union dreams of is a world with roads, filled with laughter and happiness, where looking up at the sky brings you a sense of relief. A world where even our descendants can also see hope, lasting peace and stability. This is a goal that perhaps will never be fully achieved, but they shoulder that responsibility. It's no exaggeration to say the entire union strives for this. A myriad of thoughts churned in Oscar's mind. This child thinks far beyond his age, but the fact that he killed people yet remained calm couldn't help but worry him. Could there be some psychological issue? After some thought, he slowly proposed. Come to the guild. We will consider whether you are qualified to join. During this time, you can rely on us. Prove your abilities. If you can do that, we will officially recognize you as a member. Show me if you can meet my expectations. This offer, though not a direct acceptance, lit a spark of hope in John's heart. He was no longer as stubborn as before. Instead, he stood up, thanked Oscar, and followed him. Oscar quickly arranged everything, with the large sword on his shoulder, exuding a commanding presence. He said to the guild members, it's time to depart. He assigned Sienna, a dark elf around 20 years old, to escort John to the guild. Before leaving, he instructed Sienna, this is John. Escort him under the standard procedure for victims. Sienna had a pale face, with long black hair and ears that were particularly eye-catching. She coldly announced, it will take 15 days to reach the guild. We leave immediately. Do you have any luggage? John shook his head and curiously asked, are you an elf? He candidly remarked, but your mana is very bright, different from what I imagined. At their first meeting, John's candid remark and his perception of Sienna's mysteriousness caused her cold expression to soften slightly. A small, unconscious smile touched Sienna's lips, but she quickly regained her usual expression. Turning to Oscar, she said, well then, let's go. Oscar bid Sienna farewell. Then he carefully lifted John onto the horse as if he were a cherished grandson, even though they had only met once. See you at the guild, kid, Oscar called out. John replied loudly, see you again, Vice Captain. Wishing everyone a safe return. This remark, filled with a sense of familiarity, made everyone smile. At Sienna's command, the troop of horses galloped off. John looked back at the gradually receding poorhouse, the place that held his childhood. Half a day later, Sienna gave John a gift, a dark brown leather sword sheath. Perhaps she had noticed John fiddling with his sword fragment while camping, so she had specially made it. The sheath was exquisitely crafted, sturdy, its workmanship no less than that of a professional craftsman. John was overjoyed. He attached the pin he had taken from the vice director to the front of the sheath. The color and shape of the pin harmonized with the sheath, further enhancing its elegant appearance. He bowed his head to thank Sienna. Thank you, Sienna, John said. Sienna paused for a moment. You're strange, she said, frowning slightly. Yes, so can I call you older sister? John asked. That's fine. So, how about calling me senior? After all, you'll be joining the guild later. It's up to you. John was overjoyed, while Sienna felt both proud and a little flustered. For her, who is usually called a cold witch by the religious order, this feeling was both unfamiliar and new. She tossed a branch into the fire that had been kindled beforehand to dispel this awkwardness. John, watching the red sparks shoot out, mingling with the light of mana. Sienna quietly looked into John's eyes. His eyes had a strange light, like peacock feathers. Humans can't have eyes like that. His ability to control the sword fragment is very special. It's highly likely inherited from his parents. Vice Captain Oscar said it was psychokinetic magic, Sienna said. It looks like that on the surface, but it's best to pretend it is. John immediately understood Sienna's meaning. He then asked, "What is my real ability then?" Sienna replied, "I've never witnessed any similar ability. It's like directly touching and controlling mana directly, without needing any spells or incantations. This is an ability only found in ancient elves." An ancient elf? John was a little confused. That's the race. They belong to before elves, differentiated into the current subraces. You'll understand one day. It's hard for me to explain clearly now, Sienna answered. John was absorbed in her words, not realizing that Sienna's mana had turned a pale gray, a sign of a heavy mood. "Thank you for sharing these things, Senior Sienna. It has answered many of my questions," John said. From then on, the two of them no longer chatted as intimately as before. Time passed, and the day of their arrival drew near. The black horse carrying Sienna and John ran along a deserted dirt road. On the afternoon of the 15th day since leaving the poorhouse, they finally reached the guild's headquarters. John was so astonished he was speechless. He knew about the guild, but he had never imagined it would be a city. In fact, due to the guild's status and unique nature, recording, detailed, its location and layout was not an easy task, as this pertained to security matters. In short, the guild was a vast city, and also a fortress, surrounded by high walls. It was said that this place was even safer than the king's castle. This area is divided into residential and commercial districts, Sienna introduced. Resources and races from all over the world gather here. The guild is the most fortified stronghold in the Six Lands, but this isn't due to its city walls, but because the strongest people in the world are gathered here. That's why it's known as the sword and shield of the Six Lands. The armed forces concentrated here support the kingdom, restrain the six duchies, and at the same time, protect the people from the invasion of the Grey. From now on, this will be your home. With a rumbling sound, the iron gates slowly opened. John had finally stepped into the guild. Then, Sienna walked shoulder to shoulder with John, onto the road paved with square stones. After walking a short distance, a middle-aged man, short in stature, emerged from the crowd. He also wore a red uniform. He had a very ordinary appearance. A bald head, thick, ink-black eyebrows, and a noticeable crescent-shaped scar in the middle of his forehead. "Sienna, you've had a hard journey," the man spoke. "Director Lazarus." Sienna greeted him respectfully. Clearly, this unexpected encounter had surprised her somewhat. Lazarus turned his gaze to John, looking him up and down. This child must be John. Under his gaze, John felt inexplicably tense, as if not only his appearance, but even the flow of mana within his body was being seen through. Lazarus smiled and asked John, "May I speak with you for a moment?" Entering a uniquely designed building with a distinctive style, this was the Guild Management Bureau, responsible for supervising personnel management, auditing, and general affairs. Ever since stepping into the guild, John had been overwhelmed by everything there. Everywhere were people radiating brilliant mana. Just as Sienna had said, this was a convergence of power. While he was thinking, Lazarus personally entered the room. The aura of mana emanating from him was the brightest and most profound John had ever seen in a human. Lazarus went straight to the seat opposite John and began to review a document. It turned out that the report Oscar had sent from the Den poorhouse had arrived before John. The room was unusually quiet, with only the rustling of paper and Lazarus's occasional sighs. He extended his hand towards John. Seeing John's bewildered expression, he gestured again for John to extend his left hand. John understood and quickly extended his hand. Lazarus placed his own hand on top, gently grasping it. John's gaze was fixed on the intricate and complex tattoo on Lazarus's arm, while the unique flow of mana where their palms met made his heart stir. Countless strands of mana seemed to be gently tapping against his palm through Lazarus's hand. But how can he control mana so subtly? John was inwardly astonished. Previously, he had spent days and nights training hard, constantly diligently practicing throwing his sword fragment, and was confident he had mastered this skill. But the way Lazarus controlled mana now was completely different, making John realize that what he knew was merely a grain of sand in a vast desert. However, John wasn't the only one affected by this touch. Lazarus stared intently into John's eyes, his gaze seeming to pierce John's soul. First, Lazarus said. The report says you stole a brooch from the vice director of the poorhouse and even pocketed it. But I see you don't seem like a greedy child. Why did you do that? I didn't steal it. It belonged to my grandmother, John replied. So you were retrieving what was yours. If you have it with you, I see it. John intended to withdraw his left hand to open the sheath at his hip, but for some reason, their hands seemed stuck together, inseparable. This feeling was like their mana, connecting, but it wasn't like the tree that absorbed mana. He didn't want to use force to break free, but decided to respond skillfully like Lazarus. John carefully adjusted his mana flow, allowing the mana to seep into the gap between their clasped hands, carefully mimicking Lazarus's way of manipulating mana. This wasn't difficult, as it didn't require visualizing images in his mind. He just needed to observe and imitate. But every detail needed precise control. He had to simultaneously overcome gravity and the pressure from Lazarus. The two streams of mana continuously regenerated and dissipated during their interaction. Soon, Lazarus's hand slowly lifted. This astonished him greatly. His eyes widened, and he exclaimed, "Oh, so that's how it is." His face showed irrepressible delight. "Let me address my second point of interest first. I've always been curious," Lazarus continued, "how you can directly control mana, without incantations, and with such precision." Lazarus was full of admiration. Words of praise flowed endlessly. But John felt a little uncomfortable. The feeling of being completely seen through was not pleasant at all, although hiding things from Lazarus was no easy matter. Finally able to withdraw his left hand, John took the sheathed fragment. The pin on the sheath sparkled in the light. Lazarus's eyes lit up. John keenly noticed that Lazarus's expression had changed again slightly. Even his mana fluctuated. But Lazarus quickly regained his composure, casually handing the sheath back to him. "I've seen it clearly. This is a very beautiful pin, worthy of being reclaimed." The conversation ended there. Lazarus stood up and thanked John for his time. John also stood up and asked, "So, I can live in the guild now?" "Yes, that's right," Lazarus replied. "Although you're not an official member yet, just by living here, you're already a member of the great guild family. Welcome aboard." John, afraid of missing the chance, hurriedly asked, "Director, are you perhaps the strongest person in the guild?" "Why would you think that?" "It's because I've never seen anyone possess mana as brilliant and profound as yours," John explained. "I'm just an old bear in an office," Lazarus said, supporting the talented and ambitious members of the guild. "That's all. The top 7 masters all possess special skills, and the captains and the guild master are the truly powerful ones. So, I'm just an old bear." "You must be tired today, too," Lazarus said to John. "Let's end our conversation here for today. If I have more questions," John asked, "can I come see you again next time?" Lazarus reached out, patted John's head, and said with a smile, "It's best to make an appointment. I'm quite busy too, and only make time for important matters." Somehow, John felt a sense of affinity towards Lazarus. You could see that Lazarus was a gentle and knowledgeable person. Perhaps one day, he could ask him about the things he wondered about, as well as the strange sights he had witnessed. In the tree, arriving at the administration office door, he saw Sienna waiting for him. "Senior, were you waiting for me?" Sienna said nothing, turned, and led the way. She was as cold as ever, but the brilliant magical aura around her made John feel a sense of closeness. He quickly followed. "John, this is your new school. It's a combined school. When guild members with families have to go on missions, they leave their children here. Since this is a school, you'll learn a few things. You'll be considered a potential member of the guild, and will receive basic training for 5 years. However, because the guild combines swordsmanship, magic, and skills from various countries and martial arts schools, different techniques, we don't teach specific secret techniques or unique styles. We only teach theory and basic knowledge." John wasn't really paying much attention. His eyes looked through the iron fence, full of anticipation. "Amazing. I've never learned swordsmanship and magic before. I'm really looking forward to it." Seeing John so excited, Sienna helplessly clicked her tongue, turned, and continued to lead the way. John changed his clothes. The guild's dark purple uniform was well-tailored and fit him perfectly, making him look very smart. Besides the compulsory subjects, you are free to choose your elective subjects, Daphne said, handing him 2 sheets of paper. The weekly timetable was packed with basic subjects like languages, history, geography, ethics, physical education, mathematics, and arts. John looked at the list of elective subjects. Understand. Magical power, basic swordsmanship, basic magic, herbology, astronomy, horse riding, and other electives, which made him extremely excited. He chose all the classes that didn't have scheduling conflicts. You've chosen too many subjects. You should reduce them, Daphne gently advised. But you said I could choose freely, John retorted. But studying so many will be very hard. Homework and tests will pile up. It'll be impossible to finish everything. Studying isn't easy, you know. I find every subject interesting. What's so difficult about it? John replied nonchalantly. Daphne had met quite a few eager learners like him before, but in the end, they usually didn't achieve anything outstanding because their energy was too scattered, too much. Although John didn't have a family to complain about this, she still patiently advised him out of concern. However, John truly didn't understand why Daphne was so worried. To him, studying didn't seem difficult at all, seeing that her advice wasn't working. Daphne had a compromise. All right, let's leave it like that for now. I'll talk to the teachers. You can try it out this week, and we'll adjust it next week. The two of them walked through the marble-paved hallway, approaching the classroom door. According to the timetable, the first period was compulsory language. When the door opened, more than 20 pairs of eyes simultaneously turned toward John. The ratio of boys to girls in the class was almost equal. Seeing the new classmate, most of the students gaped in astonishment, especially the girls, their curious eyes sparkling. John was no less surprised. The magical power in these children was much denser than that of other children his age he had met. John, please introduce yourself, Daphne prompted. John stood up straight and smiled confidently. I'm John, from the Denton Orphanage. It's nice to meet you all. He controlled his magical power, his clear voice resonating throughout the classroom, carrying a special charm that made everyone unconsciously remember his name. John was no longer a stranger to this feeling of being noticed. Daphne was also a little stunned. Then she pointed to an empty seat in the last row. You can sit there. John walked down the aisle and sat down under everyone's gaze. Yes, John, Daphne said. Please read aloud the fairy tale on page 24 of the textbook. Daphne requested. Yes, ma'am. I learned it at the orphanage. John opened his book. The story was The Furry Bride, the work that Amy had him read last time before taking him to area number 2. This coincidence made John feel that life was truly magical. Past memories suddenly flooded back, but he calmly read on. While reading, John couldn't help but wonder if Amy's choice of this fairy tale had any meaning. Was she comparing herself to the girl hiding a secret? But he quickly dismissed these speculations. People's hearts are complex. How could one easily see through them? When John finished reading and sat down, Daphne praised him repeatedly, inquiring about his previous studies. His performance made Daphne see him in a new light. When he returned to his seat, he was immediately surrounded by his classmates. No one could hide their admiration for him. These children, the children of guild members, were all very polite and friendly, not at all arrogant. Besides, what's wrong with admiring a handsome boy? A girl with abundant magical power caught John's attention. Her dark brown hair and delicate features reminded him of the figure who had been brutally murdered in the vision of the tree. I'm Sophie, the class president. It's nice to meet you. I hope we can get along. John, what elective did you choose for the next period? Someone asked. Basic swordsmanship, John replied. John's answer made everyone exclaim in surprise. Sophie smiled, seeing you carrying a dagger. I guess you'd choose swordsmanship. It seems you also want to join the guild. John had actually just chosen the subject randomly, but Sophie's words weren't wrong. However, he couldn't help but wonder, do you have to learn swordsmanship to join the guild? John had no interest in becoming a swordsman. He loathed holding a sword, and his physique wasn't suited for swordsmanship either. He was dragged off by his classmates to change into gym clothes, then quickly arrived at the training ground. In the distance, a tall man stood with his arms crossed, his sharp eyes observing. Line up in order of arrival. His shout rang out. The children immediately scattered and ran. John, not understanding what was happening, wondered, where am I? What's going on? A classmate turned back and prompted, why aren't you running yet? John took a deep breath, magical power surging with it, activating a magic spell, body reinforcement. In an instant, John's speed was like lightning as he shot forward. With a burst of speed, he overtook most of the others, except for the class president. She looked back in astonishment at this new classmate. Just as she registered this, John overtook her and took the lead. He ran laughing, ha, as if having great fun and not tiring at all. Even the teacher couldn't help but notice him. This kid is interesting. Swordsman Diego narrowed his eyes, trying to get a clear look at the figure approaching at dizzying speed. He only saw a child he had never met before, running forward at an astonishing pace, his whole body exuding an unusual aura. So it's the new student. To think I'd be momentarily taken aback by a child's presence. Impressive. Let's observe a bit more. Diego quickly adjusted the day's lesson plan. Then he shouted toward John, "Keep running. Let's see who can last until the end." John was still full of energy, while everyone else was panting heavily, on the verge of collapsing. "Assemble." At this moment, Diego's voice rang out. After running like that, John felt incredibly refreshed. He thought to himself, if only every day had classes like this, it would be great. Sophie stopped, her body trembling slightly. She slowly turned her head, disbelief clear on her face. "How could you?" Just now, John had run with all his might towards Sophie, and had caught up to her. He caught up. In the end, he ran a whole lap more than me. And even after running like that, he doesn't look tired at all. "Quite interesting, isn't he, Sophie?" Diego remarked. You must have rested enough. I am Diego Sanchez. From now on, I will be teaching you basic swordsmanship, Diego said. "Let's get along, John." "I look forward to your guidance, Mr. Diego," John replied. "All right," Diego responded. "Now, everyone, pick up a wooden sword from the side," Diego ordered. The children, sprawled on the ground, mumbled complaints as they struggled to get up and gather around the rack to choose wooden swords. However, John just stood in front of the rack. Seeing this, Diego approached and asked John, "Have you never held a sword before?" "No, sir," John replied. "Then what are you hesitating for?" Diego pressed. "I don't want to hold a sword," John stated. John knew well the power of a sword. Memories associated with swords had once made him both angry and sorrowful. That was why he didn't want to touch a sword. "A sword is fundamentally a tool for injuring and killing," Diego began. "It's good to be cautious with a sword. But the sword itself has no good or evil. It is merely a tool. What matters is the one who wields it," Diego continued. John tilted his head, not quite understanding the meaning behind it. Diego patiently explained, "The value of a sword lies not in itself, but in the one who holds it. It reflects the character and soul of its wielder." These words made John ponder. He wondered, if Black hadn't used a sword back then, but chosen a different weapon, will my feelings about him have changed? One must bravely face everything, not run away from it. This is not just an attitude towards swordsmanship, but also a way of life, Diego said with a meaningful tone. But John still didn't want to learn swordsmanship or become a swordsman, even if it was a condition for joining the guild. He was determined to prove himself in other ways. But after hearing Diego's words, he realized he couldn't keep running away. With a decisive movement, John picked up the wooden sword in front of him, feeling its weight. Even though it was just a wooden sword, as soon as he gripped the hilt, a strange sense of comfort spread through him. Diego saw John's action and praised him inwardly. Never mind his magical power or physical strength. Just by looking at his attitude of facing it, John already has the makings of an excellent swordsman. To hide his satisfaction, Diego said to everyone, "Now, pair up in groups of 2 for practice. Whether you've learned swordsmanship before or not, the method doesn't matter. What's essential is the fighting spirit and the determination to win, to ensure fairness." John and Sophie were paired together, while the other students also formed pairs for practice. John and Sophie looked at each other, while the children around them oohed in amazement. Perhaps everyone had been looking forward to this moment for a long time. Even if John won the running race, he'll still have a hard time in swordsmanship, right? A student asked. John's opponent is Sophie, who's from the Bobo family, renowned for their master-level swordsmanship, recognized throughout the kingdom. The students began to murmur excitedly. "Ready, begin." As soon as Diego finished speaking, Sophie quickly adjusted her stance, leaning forward slightly. Her left foot stepped forward, and both hands slowly raised the wooden sword. John immediately understood why the teacher had praised her. Sophie's stance was as solid as a rock, exuding a dignified and formidable aura. John had never witnessed formal swordsmanship before. His only memories of swords were unpleasant experiences that made him detest them and only want to destroy. But now, facing Sophie's offensive stance, John felt confused, unsure how to respond. John noticed Sophie raising her elbow to head level, the area below her shoulder seemingly exposed. It looked like a perfect attacking posture. But based on her aura and magical power, John realized she had no weaknesses at all. Let me use this opportunity to learn. Seeing John's stance, both Sophie and Diego frowned, sharing the same thought inwardly. This is a perfect offensive and defensive stance. Who would have thought this was John's first time holding a sword? John's movements were natural and fluid, without any of a beginner's awkwardness. It was even so textbook perfect that it erased individual personality, yet it exuded professionalism and elegance. At this moment, John and Sophie silently regarded each other. The silent battle had begun. Sophie launched the first move of the Bobo, swordsmanship style. Sophie moved nimbly, instantly closing the distance. John swung his sword down. The entire movement was powerful, stable, and decisive, accompanied by a whistling sound of the wind. Sophie closed in on John. John took a step forward, initially intending to stab Sophie's chest, but he immediately changed his mind, rotating his wrist to the left. After Sophie's first attack failed, she instinctively launched a second move, slashing diagonally upwards from below, but it was firmly blocked by John's wooden sword. Diego smiled at parry, this seemingly ridiculous display, and the strange sensation as the two swords clashed made him extremely surprised. In that moment, Sophie's mind became even more chaotic. As a sword prodigy, well-trained from a young age in a prestigious family, repeatedly facing situations beyond her comprehension, made it difficult for her to maintain her composure. John, quickly noticing the disturbance in Sophie's magic flow, utilized the recoil from the clash of their swords. He rotated his wrist, drawing a large circle with his wooden sword. The tip aimed straight at Sophie's neck. Stop! The moment the word was spoken, John's hand froze. Sophie felt a wave of disappointment wash over her, but she quickly stood up straight, saying in a determined voice, "You stopped it, sir. All right, let's spar again next time." John replied cheerfully. He himself was very excited about the recent match. The next 6 periods were basic magic. So, does that mean the break will be longer? The classmates said. The children's conversation left John utterly perplexed. He asked, why is magic class like a break? Don't we have to study hard if we want to become guild members? Hearing this question, a look of awkwardness flickered across the children's faces, similar to when John had asked about swordsmanship earlier. Something they considered obvious was questioned by John in a confusing way. They answered one by one. What magic can we possibly learn at this age? What spells could we use? John just arrived at the guild. Don't talk to him with such an obvious tone. It's true. Before class, he even asked me if learning swordsmanship was essential to get into the guild. Maybe he really doesn't understand. He'll naturally understand once he takes the class. The instructor for basic magic was the former honorary commander, Professor Arthur. John followed his classmates to the magic classroom. The classroom was very spacious. The walls and ceiling were constructed from rough-hewn stone blocks. The seats were arranged in a fan shape, like an audience seating area, facing a podium with a large blackboard at the front. At the front of the classroom, an old man with a bushy white beard was seated. Sophie whispered an introduction. That's Professor Arthur. He used to be the head of the honorary committee. Now he's the principal of the Magic Academy. The concentration of magic power around him is even higher than Director Lazarus. John wanted to know how strong the strongest person in the Alliance truly was. Before going upstairs to take his seat, John approached the podium and bowed respectfully. Hello, Professor. I am John. Starting today, I'll be in your class. Arthur stroked his long beard lightly, his eyes full of curiosity following John. I am Arthur. He began slowly, seeing your curious expression. I had thought someone dressed like you. Must be a talented mage. I hear you're even more passionate about magic than I am. Why is that? For many, magic class is just a time to relax. Immediately, a few children in the class perked up, sitting straight and listened. John replied without hesitation. Someone once said that everyone has their own strengths. If you're good at something, you'll succeed in that field. You might even be able to apply it to other fields. This perspective is really interesting. And then, Arthur pressed, I want to become a mage and join the guild, John said with determination. As these words left his lips, the classroom fell into a strange silence. An utter silence enveloped the room. Finally, Arthur was the first to break the stillness. Want to become a mage? Haha, how interesting. It's been a long time since I've heard that. Sophie, an outstanding student in the class, answered clearly, because learning magic requires a lot of knowledge and consumes a great deal of energy, both mentally and physically. John continued to ask, specifically, what makes it difficult? How is one considered to have mastered magic? Usually, even highly talented individuals need at least 15 years to learn magic, from scratch to become a grade 1 mage. Sophie's words left John in awe. For those who wanted to join the guild immediately after graduation, this was indeed a considerable shock, and Arthur continued to explain, in the guild system, grade 1 mages do not have the right to directly participate in core matters, nor can they become official members. They can only stay in AUS area near the reserve unit. Only after more than 15 years of training to become a grade 2 mage do they qualify to become pursuing members of the guild. Arthur looked directly at John. By this standard, if you want to become a grade 2 mage and join the guild, it would take at least 25 years. John, what do you think now? Yes. John thought for a moment, then replied in a firm tone. Well, to be sure, I'll learn grade 3 magic before graduation. As soon as he finished speaking, the class once again fell silent. Arthur and the students all wore expressions of surprise. Well then, let's talk about why. The guild focuses on swordsmanship, while magic is gradually considered a discipline for pursuing truth and wisdom. Arthur turned towards the blackboard and began writing complex characters at great speed. The dense script spread from the corner of the blackboard across its entirety. So much content, it looked like several pages of a book. This is the incantation for Fire Arrow. More precisely, the method of inscribing the incantation. Arthur looked around the class. Does anyone recognize any problem with this incantation? John stared at the blackboard. These characters looked familiar, reminding him of the carvings around. The tree hollow in the outbuilding of the tainted ritual camp. The classroom was dead silent. To understand the incantation, one needed to study ancient languages for a whole year, and understanding the logic and finding errors within it was even more difficult. Seeing this, Arthur consoled them. It's normal not to find. Don't be discouraged. Tapping the board lightly with a ruler, he explained calmly. Don't let its complex appearance fool you. Fire Arrow is actually one of the most basic spells. Higher-level spells have incantations so long they defy imagination. Some can even be as long as several books. Arthur ran his finger lightly over the mystical script. The characters suddenly glowed brilliantly, drawing in mana, then erupted into a fire arrow blazing brightly in the air. John's eyes widened, amazed by the wondrous display of magic, while also keenly observing that the fire arrow's shape was unstable, seeming as if it could dissipate at any moment. Magic is inherently extremely sensitive. Arthur explained, even if you pour all your mana into it, the result might still not be as intended. Just one small error makes finding the flaw incredibly difficult, leading to casting failure and dire consequences. He waved his hand, dispelling the fire arrow, then marked a point about 2/3 of the way through the incantation. This time, a perfect fire arrow appeared, causing the whole class to gasp in admiration. Arthur then continued, adding new characters to the incantation, extending it onto an auxiliary board. When cast again, the flame's form transformed. Dozens of arrows shifted from a flat plane to a vivid three-dimensional form. Impressive. Mages of old constantly modified incantations to increase magical power. After countless experiments, they built the complete system of magic we have today, he continued, demonstrating, transforming the basic spell into a more complex fireball. As magic becomes more advanced, the strain on mana, mental, and physical energy increases manifold. John, captivated by the demonstration, quietly took out paper and pen, copying the incantation on the board. Who can tell me why magic is less efficient than swordsmanship? Sophie raised her hand and answered, using the same mana. Channeling mana into a weapon to create a sword aura is much simpler and more effective than casting a spell. Furthermore, it's easier to learn and highly sustainable. Arthur nodded in approval. A very good answer. Next time, remember to regulate your breathing before answering. Arthur. John listened intently, realizing that, with his current mana level, mastering powerful magic would be extremely difficult, but he also recognized hidden possibilities. If I thoroughly study the casting process and related phenomena, could I use powerful magic? Arthur suddenly asked John, what is the key to connecting the medium, magic and phenomenon? Arthur nodded. When the caster's mana harmonizes with the incantation, magic will manifest. But in practice, one cannot always rely on the incantation. High-level magic demands more complex control, and the difficulty increases significantly. Then Arthur again drew on the board. A magic matrix is an image, a conversion of the incantation into lines and figures. Spiderweb-like lines spread out, circles encompassing layers upon layers, forming a stable diagram. The class became increasingly lively. John asked a question. Is chanting the act of transforming the incantation into language? Arthur raised an eyebrow in surprise. Why do you think so? John thought for a moment, then explained, I think the incantation is like a blueprint. The magic matrix is its visual representation. So, the spoken incantation should be a form of command, in a different linguistic form. A flicker of astonishment lit up Arthur's eyes. This student before him could make an assertion similar to that of high-level mages, filling him with hope for John's future. An impressive answer, truly astounding, that you could recognize an incantation as a form of linguistic conversion. This is the very core of chanting. Arthur then continued to explain in more detail. The secret of chanting is precisely to combine the most accurate words in the most suitable way. And immediately after, a perfect fireball appeared in the air. Compared to the fire magic demonstrated earlier, this fireball radiated a completely different, powerful aura. How strange. Never before has John felt so moved in a class like this. It seems I've helped you clearly understand the difficulty of magic. John, have you still not changed your mind? Arthur asked. Of course not. I like magic even more now. John replied in a resolute tone. Very well. Starting next lesson, we will begin learning ancient languages. I will distribute a book to each of you. Therefore, think about the nature of ancient languages. Everyone could only hold their heads in helplessness. To them, this was no different from studying literature. Magic class was very interesting, compared to self-studying from books. Being taught by skilled teachers, and then practicing to learn, made John feel he had gained a great deal. And so, an academic prodigy was born. He even felt that perhaps these periods of intense study would be the happiest moments of his life. He returned to his room and immediately focused on study. The only homework he hadn't completed that day was the assignment from Headmaster Arthur. He opened the ancient language dictionary, reading carefully page by page, trying to understand the characteristics of a language. Although John had a gift for learning languages, the ancient language was still very difficult to grasp. But after deciphering them, he understood how this formula was constructed. With my current amount of mana, I still can't use powerful traditional magic. Powerful. So why don't I create a unique type of magic, suited to me? To John, even a fireball had some unnecessary parts. He thought he could find a more efficient method, a method suitable for his amount of mana. No sooner said than done. John immediately set to work without hesitation. Finally, after completing the incantation, he converted it into a matrix. The magic was formed from lines and spaces. Then, using precise words to form the spoken incantation, he chanted. A fist-sized fireball suddenly appeared in midair. John couldn't contain himself any longer.